Welcome to Sleepy Stories. In this episode, we will take a clear and steady look at how reality shapes itself into the structures we see across the universe and within our own world. The purpose of this story is to help you rest while learning, offering gentle scientific clarity as your mind becomes quieter. If you do not fall asleep immediately, that is completely fine. You can still let the explanations settle softly as you listen. Simply allow your breathing to slow while the ideas unfold at their natural pace. And if you enjoy these explorations, you are welcome to like and subscribe so you can return to more episodes whenever you wish. Matter may appear scattered and unpredictable at first glance, yet everywhere we look, the universe reveals a deep tendency towards structure. From small particles to vast galaxies, patterns emerge as if guided by a quiet logic. Spirals form in storms and in star systems. Clusters bloom in both living tissues and distant nebulae. Even within the smallest building blocks of nature, we find arrangements that hold together in reliable ways. These patterns exist not because something directs them, but because matter follows consistent rules. When these rules interact over time, they generate order that can endure. This story begins with a simple observation. Reality is not chaotic. Instead, it builds structure from the most basic interactions. When particles attract, repel, or settle into balance, patterns begin to form. When these patterns support each other, larger forms appear. Every level of organization rests on the level beneath it, and each one becomes the foundation for something even more intricate. It is a progression that unfolds slowly and consistently, and one that continues throughout the universe. At the smallest scales, particles follow precise laws that determine how they move and how they combine. These laws do not vary from place to place. They remain steady across space and time, shaping everything that arises. When particles interact under these laws, they do not scatter randomly. Instead, they fall into rhythms that repeat themselves. Waves take form, boundaries appear. Stable arrangements hold their shape long enough for the next stage of structure to develop. Even the simplest interactions create subtle patterns that guide matter into the next layer of organization. From these beginnings, atoms emerge as the first stable structures. Atoms are built from particles that settle into balanced relationships. These relationships give atoms their shape, their behavior, and their ability to interact. With atoms in place, the path to more complex arrangements becomes possible. Atoms combine into molecules. Molecules form networks, and networks give rise to systems that respond to their surroundings. Step by step, each level of complexity grows from the one before it. This quiet progression is not limited to the microscopic world. The same tendency appears in the vastness of space. Clouds of gas follow gravitational rules that draw them together. When they become dense enough, stars ignite. Around stars, disks of dust flatten, swirl, and assemble into planets. Entire planetary systems take shape as gravity, motion, and temperature guide matter into stable patterns. Across even larger scales, galaxies follow their own patterns, forming spirals, halos, and clusters that persist for billions of years. Through all of these examples, one idea remains constant. Order arises naturally when simple rules interact repeatedly across time. This story will follow that idea through every scale of existence, showing how the universe organizes itself without instruction or design. As you listen, you may find comfort in the steady rhythm of these processes, knowing that the same quiet principles that shape distant galaxies also shape the structure of your own world. The universe began in a state so simple that no familiar structures could exist. In its earliest moments, everything was compressed into conditions far hotter and denser than anything we encounter today. Particles raced so quickly that they could not settle into stable relationships. Any attempt at forming a structure ended almost as soon as it began. Yet even in this extreme environment, the same consistent rules that shape the modern universe were already in place. As time moved forward, the universe expanded and cooled. With each small decrease in temperature, new opportunities for order appeared. As expansion continued, the first steps towards stability emerged. Quarks, once unable to remain together, slowed enough to combine into protons and neutrons. These particles carried the potential for more complex structures, yet they still moved through an environment too energetic for lasting bonds. Only when the universe cooled further did electrons begin to settle into orbits around these nuclei. This was the moment when atoms first appeared, forming hydrogen and helium, the two simplest and most abundant elements. The creation of atoms represented a turning point. For the first time, matter could form structures that survived long enough to shape what came next. These early atoms drifted freely through space, spreading out as the universe continued to grow. Their formation gave the universe a new texture. Instead of a sea of unbound particles, there were now building blocks capable of combining into larger forms. These atoms did not assemble into complex structures immediately. Instead, they floated for hundreds of millions of years, waiting for gravitational forces to gather them into dense regions. Once gathered, they became the seeds of stars, galaxies, and every physical structure that would later appear. The simplicity of this beginning may seem distant from the rich complexity of the world we know, yet the connection is direct. The same laws that allowed atoms to form also guided every later step. When particles behaved according to consistent principles, the path towards structure became inevitable. Order arose not because anything planned it, but because matter could not behave otherwise. When the universe cooled enough to permit stable arrangements, those arrangements naturally took shape. As atoms collected into clouds, small irregularities in density created tiny differences in gravitational pull. These differences, though subtle, allowed certain regions to grow denser more quickly than others. Over time, these regions became the earliest sites of star formation. The story of structure is full of such moments, where slight variations in initial conditions lead to new levels of order. A region just a little denser than its surroundings becomes a gathering point for more matter, amplifying its growth. Eventually, heat and pressure rise until nuclear fusion begins. With this ignition, a star is born, providing light and energy that influence everything nearby. Even before stars formed, the universe was already shaping itself according to simple causes. Once atoms existed, their interactions created a predictable environment. They absorbed and released energy in specific amounts. They moved according to temperature and density. They responded to gravity in ways that allowed structure to grow slowly but steadily. These early behaviors set the foundation for more elaborate patterns. Nothing in this process required direction, intention, or design. It was the natural unfolding of consistent rules operating over time. As we move forward through this story, each layer of organization builds on these early steps. Atoms allowed chemistry to begin. Chemistry allowed molecules to appear, and molecules provided the groundwork for systems capable of evolving. Long before life arose, the universe had already demonstrated its tendency to form structures when conditions allowed. This tendency began with cooling and expansion, two simple processes that opened the path toward everything that followed. The forces that shape matter are quiet, steady, and universal. They do not vary from one side of the cosmos to the other, nor do they change from moment to moment. This stability allows the universe to form structures that endure. Among these forces, gravity acts as the long reach that draws mass together. It works gently on small scales and powerfully on large ones, guiding planets, stars, and galaxies into coherent forms. Its influence grows as objects accumulate more mass, allowing small gatherings of matter to become centers around which larger systems develop. Without gravity, the universe would remain a diffuse fog of particles, never settling into suns or worlds. While gravity governs the broad architecture of the cosmos, electromagnetism shapes the realm of atoms and molecules. It determines how particles with electric charge attract or repel one another, creating balanced arrangements that give matter its structure. The behavior of electrons, governed by both electromagnetic attraction and quantum rules, defines how atoms form and how they interact. Every familiar substance, from water to rock to living tissue, owes its properties to these interactions. Electromagnetism also allows energy to travel as light, which carries information across space and powers countless processes on planets like Earth. The strong nuclear force operates at an even smaller scale. It binds protons and neutrons within atomic nuclei, creating stability in a region where electromagnetic repulsion would otherwise push these particles apart. This force holds the core of each atom together, allowing the periodic table to exist. Without it, only the simplest particles would survive. The weak nuclear force, though more subtle, plays a crucial role as well. It enables certain transformations inside atoms and fuels processes within stars that create new elements. Through these transformations, the universe gains the chemical variety needed for complex structures. Together, these four fundamental forces form the framework within which all organization takes place. They are not directed by anything outside themselves. They simply act according to principles that remain consistent everywhere. As matter follows these principles, patterns arise naturally. When gravity gathers gas into a star, when electrons settle into stable arrangements around a nucleus, when particles fuse or decay, the universe is shaping itself through the quiet influence of these forces. What makes these forces remarkable is not their strength but their reliability. Because they behave predictably, the universe can develop the same kinds of structures in places separated by immense distances. Spiral galaxies form in far regions of space with no contact between them. Stars follow similar life cycles regardless of where they are born. Even on planets light years apart, atoms interact in familiar ways, creating materials that obey the same rules. The consistency of these forces turns the cosmos into a stage where order is possible. As we look deeper into how reality organizes itself, it becomes clear that these forces do more than guide the formation of structures. They create boundaries that determine what can exist. Atoms cannot form outside certain ranges of temperature and pressure because the forces within them require balance. Molecules cannot hold together unless electrons behave according to specific rules. Stars cannot shine unless gravity and internal pressure reach a stable equilibrium. These boundaries do not limit creativity. They provide the conditions under which complexity can grow. This segment of the story rests on a simple truth. Structure is not imposed on the universe. It arises from the interplay of forces that allow matter to hold itself together. Every atom, every star, every living organism emerges from this interplay. The reliability of these forces sets the stage for the next layer of organization, where atoms join to form molecules, and a new chapter of complexity unfolds. Atoms represent the first long-lasting structures in the universe, and their stability makes everything that follows possible. Each atom forms when electrons settle into balanced positions around a nucleus. These positions are not chosen but emerge from the interaction between electromagnetic attraction and the quantum rules that govern how electrons can exist. Electrons cannot move freely wherever they wish. Instead, they occupy specific energy levels that create predictable arrangements. This predictability allows atoms to behave in consistent ways, forming a foundation upon which more complex structures can grow. The earliest atoms were mostly hydrogen and helium. Hydrogen, the simplest of all atoms, contains one proton and one electron. Helium contains two of each, creating a slightly more complex but still elegant structure. These two elements filled the universe for hundreds of millions of years before heavier elements existed. Their stability allowed them to drift peacefully through space, gathering gradually under the influence of gravity. When clouds of these atoms became dense enough, the heat and pressure at their centers increased until fusion began. Fusion transformed hydrogen into helium and released energy, giving birth to the first stars. Inside stars, atoms experience conditions far more intense than anything found elsewhere in the universe. Under these extreme temperatures and pressures, new elements form through fusion. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and many others emerge from these stellar furnaces. When stars exhaust their fuel, some collapse and explode, scattering these heavier elements into space. This process enriches the universe with the materials needed to build planets, rocks, oceans, and eventually life. Even in these dramatic transformations, the stability of atoms persists. Once formed, an atom remains itself, unless broken apart by forces stronger than those it typically encounters. The beauty of atoms lies not only in their durability but also in their capacity to combine. An atom's electrons determine how it interacts with others. When atoms come close, their electrons may shift, share, or transfer positions in ways that create bonds. These bonds allow atoms to form molecules. The structure of each molecule reflects the balance of forces within it, and the variety of possible arrangements is immense. Water, for example, forms when two hydrogen atoms bond with one oxygen atom. The shape of the molecule, created by the angles between its bonds, gives water many of its remarkable properties. The stability of atoms ensures that molecules behave consistently as well. Whether on Earth, on a distant planet, or drifting through a nebula, the same rules determine how atoms combine. This universality means that chemical complexity is not unique to one place. Anywhere conditions allow atoms to meet and interact, molecules can form. Over time, these molecules can grow into networks that store energy, exchange information, or respond to their environment. All of this arises from the reliability of atomic structure. As we explore deeper layers of complexity, it becomes clear that atoms are not merely fragments of matter. They are organized systems governed by relationships that hold their components together. These relationships remain stable for billions of years, allowing the universe to develop structure across unimaginable spans of time. Without atomic stability, stars would not shine for long periods, planets would not endure, and life could not arise. Every aspect of reality builds upon this quiet dependability. The structures we will explore next owe their existence to atoms. When atoms join into molecules, they introduce new patterns of interaction. Molecules can store energy, change shape, and combine into larger networks. They represent the next step in the universe's progression toward complexity, revealing how simple building blocks give rise to intricate arrangements that shape the world around us. Molecules represent a major step in the universe's progression toward complexity. When atoms bond, they do more than simply attach to each other. They create arrangements that hold energy in specific ways, shift shape in response to their surroundings, and interact with other molecules according to clear and consistent rules. These interactions form the basis of chemistry. Even the simplest molecules behave differently from the atoms that compose them, showing that new properties can arise when smaller units join into larger structures. Chemical bonds form when electrons rearrange themselves between atoms. Some atoms share electrons, creating stable partnerships. Others transfer electrons, forming charged particles that attract each other. Still others form bonds through subtler interactions that depend on shape and orientation. Each type of bond adds to the variety of possible structures, allowing the universe to build molecules with simple, repeating patterns, as well as molecules with intricate, branching shapes. Water, methane, carbon dioxide, and countless others follow these principles, demonstrating how a few basic rules generate a wide range of forms. As molecules grow more complex, they can store and release energy in ways that influence their environments. When sunlight strikes a molecule, it may absorb part of that energy, change its shape, or release the energy later through chemical reactions. These processes allow molecules to become part of larger cycles. Water molecules move through oceans, air, and clouds, carrying heat and shaping climate. Carbon-containing molecules participate in reactions that regulate atmospheric composition. Even in these early chemical interactions, small networks begin to take form, linking molecules into chains of cause and effect. Patterns emerge naturally from these interactions. When certain reactions occur more quickly than others, concentrations of molecules rise or fall in predictable ways. Temperature, pressure, and the presence of other substances influence these reactions, creating gradients and flows. In some environments, molecules arrange themselves into repeating structures, such as crystals, layers, or simple membranes. These patterns arise from the inherent tendencies of molecules to seek stable configurations. No intention guides them. They appear because the rules governing matter favor arrangements that reduce energy and increase stability. These early patterns introduce a gentle sense of order that resembles the foundations of more complex systems. When conditions remain steady, reactions settle into rhythms. Some regions form structures repeatedly because the environment supports them. Others shift gradually as new molecules enter or old ones break apart. In these quiet transitions, the universe demonstrates its ability to organize itself even before life appears. If you notice yourself relaxing as these slow, rhythmic processes unfold, that is completely natural. Thinking about gentle chemical patterns often encourages the mind to settle, and you may allow that settling to deepen if it feels comfortable. Chemical complexity creates the possibility for molecules to influence each other in increasingly sophisticated ways. When one reaction produces a substance that triggers another reaction, chains of interactions form. These chains can spread through an environment, creating networks that behave almost like early versions of metabolism. In certain conditions, molecules can even gather on surfaces, concentrate in droplets, or join into structures that protect themselves from their surroundings. Each of these steps adds to the universe's capacity for organization, showing how simple building blocks can assemble into patterns that persist. The leap from individual molecules to chemical networks marks a significant step towards systems capable of stability and change. These networks do not yet resemble life, but they possess qualities that make further complexity possible. They demonstrate memory by holding their structure over time. They show flexibility by adjusting to shifts in their environment, and they reveal that matter, guided only by consistent rules, can build systems that behave in coordinated ways. From this foundation, the path toward the first self-sustaining systems becomes clear, opening the way for the next level of organization. As chemical networks grew more intricate, the universe approached a subtle threshold. Patterns that once existed only for moments began to persist. Certain arrangements of molecules remained stable long enough to influence the behavior of nearby molecules. These enduring patterns acted like small systems that maintained themselves through continuous interaction. They did not resemble living organisms, yet they displayed qualities that made further organization possible. Stability became a defining feature, allowing patterns to last long enough for new patterns to build upon them. The idea of a self-maintaining system can be understood by looking closely at feedback. When the outcome of a process loops back to affect its own continuation, a new kind of order emerges. Positive feedback amplifies change. If a reaction produces heat, and that heat accelerates the reaction, the system grows more active. Negative feedback slows or stabilizes change. If a buildup of a certain molecule reduces the rate at which it is produced, the system steadies itself. These two forms of feedback, working together, create structures that neither collapse quickly nor expand without limit. Instead, they settle into states that persist. One of the clearest examples appears in simple convection. When water in a shallow basin is heated from below, it does not warm evenly. Instead, currents form as warm water rises and cool water sinks. These currents organize themselves into repeating cells that maintain their shape as long as heat flows through the system. No single molecule dictates this pattern. It arises from collective behavior. The result is a dynamic structure that renews itself continuously, adjusting in small ways to changes in heat or motion. This kind of persistent pattern demonstrates how order can emerge from ongoing processes rather than fixed forms. Chemical systems show similar behavior. Certain reactions produce molecules that catalyze additional reactions, creating steady loops of production and breakdown. These loops rely on the balance between supply and consumption. When too much of one substance appears, reactions slow or shift. When levels drop, reactions intensify. These self-regulating networks create internal stability, even in fluctuating environments. They hold their patterns because each component influences others in a way that keeps the whole intact. This kind of coordination is an essential precursor to complexity. A system that maintains itself provides a stable platform upon which additional layers of organization can build. Without stability, patterns would vanish before further structure could arise. With stability, new patterns can form around existing ones, creating nested systems that evolve in both size and sophistication. The earliest self-maintaining systems on Earth likely followed this logic, forming not as isolated reactions but as interacting networks situated on mineral surfaces or within small pockets of water. These networks did not require intention or guidance. Their behavior emerged naturally from the rules of chemistry. Molecules interacted because of their shapes, charges, and energies. Some interactions reinforced each other, others balanced each other. Over time, the combinations that held together persisted, while less stable arrangements dissolved. This quiet filtering process favored systems with resilience, adaptability, and internal coherence. In environments that offered steady energy sources, such as volcanic vents or tidal pools, these networks had ample opportunity to strengthen themselves. Repeated cycles of heating and cooling, wetting and drying, or concentration and dilution encouraged the formation of networks that could withstand variation. Each cycle refined the system, selecting for arrangements that survived and discarding those that fell apart. Through this process, the foundations for later biological systems began to appear. As the universe continued to express its tendency toward order, these early systems demonstrated that complexity could arise from simple causes. They showed that persistence is not an accident but a natural outcome of feedback and interaction. What began as scattered chemical reactions slowly matured into stable structures capable of influencing their surroundings in coordinated ways. With these systems in place, the path toward molecules that could store information and respond to change more directly began to open, setting the stage for the next chapter in the story of organization. Early Earth provided a landscape filled with opportunities for chemical complexity to deepen. Its surface was shaped by constant volcanic activity, with molten rock cooling into minerals that offered countless surfaces for reactions to take place. These surfaces acted as quiet laboratories, holding molecules close together long enough for new combinations to form. At the same time, the atmosphere shifted between warm periods and cooler intervals, creating cycles that exposed molecules to changing conditions. These cycles encouraged reactions that would not occur in a steady environment. Each shift in temperature or moisture opened the door to new arrangements of matter. Oceans and smaller bodies of water became essential sites for this growing complexity. Water provided a medium that allowed molecules to move, collide, and interact. Waves and currents stirred the oceans constantly, bringing together substances from distant locations. Near hydrothermal vents, where hot water rich in minerals flowed into cooler seas, chemical gradients formed naturally. These gradients created conditions where molecules could accumulate energy, release it, or transform into more stable forms. Many scientists believe that these regions were among the first to support networks of reactions that behaved like early versions of metabolism. On land, tidal pools followed their own rhythm of concentration and dilution. When the tide receded, water evaporated slowly, leaving behind dense mixtures of molecules. These mixtures encouraged reactions that required close contact. When the tide returned, the pools refilled, carrying the results of those reactions into the wider ocean. This cycle repeated endlessly, offering fresh material each time. Across countless locations and over long spans of time, these repeating processes enriched the chemical environment. They allowed small networks to grow more stable and more complex. Mineral surfaces added an additional layer of organization. Some minerals held molecules in positions that made certain reactions more likely. Others helped charge molecules with energy from sunlight or geothermal heat. When molecules adhered to these surfaces, they were not scattered randomly. Instead, they formed orderly arrays that brought them into structured relationships. These relationships acted like templates that guided future reactions, slowly building patterns that held themselves together even when conditions shifted. Energy reached early Earth in many forms. Sunlight warmed the surface and powered reactions in shallow waters. Lightning delivered sudden bursts of energy that rearranged molecules into new forms. Heat from the planet's interior rose through the crust and fueled reactions in deep environments. With so many energy sources available, chemical systems had many chances to grow more active. They absorbed energy, released it, or stored it within their structures. The most stable of these structures persisted, becoming anchors for additional reactions. Over time, certain combinations of molecules proved especially resilient. They could cycle through reactions repeatedly, forming loops that continued as long as energy flowed through them. These loops behaved like the earliest precursors to metabolic pathways. Their persistence allowed them to influence surrounding molecules, shaping the chemical landscape. Some of these networks may have formed within small compartments such as droplets or thin films, where boundaries provided protection from disruptive forces. Boundaries also concentrated molecules, increasing the likelihood of interactions that led to further complexity. What emerged from these environments was not yet life, but something leaning gently in that direction. The universe demonstrated once again its preference for stable arrangements. Chemical networks that held together for longer periods gained greater influence. They created local conditions that favored their own continuation. In regions with consistent cycles of energy and material flow, these networks had countless opportunities to deepen their structure. Step by step, they moved from isolated reactions towards systems capable of memory, repetition, and gradual improvement. These early developments show that organization did not appear suddenly. It grew through steady accumulation, guided entirely by the rules of chemistry and the conditions of the planet. As these networks matured, they prepared the way for molecules that could store information directly within their structure, marking the next major transition in the rise of complexity. As chemical networks grew more interconnected, a new possibility began to emerge. Some molecules started to carry patterns within their structure that influenced how they behaved during reactions. These patterns acted like a simple form of memory. When a molecule with a certain arrangement participated in a reaction, it often produced copies that shared the same arrangement. This meant that information, in a very early sense, could be preserved. Molecules were no longer only reacting based on immediate conditions. They were also shaped by patterns passed down from previous reactions. Among the many molecules forming in early Earth's environments, some stood out for their ability to hold these patterns more reliably. They could link together in long chains, with each part of the chain carrying a specific piece of information. The order of these parts mattered, because it determined how the molecule interacted with others. Small changes in this order produced different outcomes. Molecules built in this way could store far more information than any single reaction could convey. They represented a level of structure that reached beyond individual interactions. In environments where molecules concentrated, such as drying shorelines or porous mineral structures, these information-carrying chains formed more easily. Each fragment that joined the chain added to its pattern. Over time, certain sequences proved more stable than others. Stability allowed these sequences to accumulate, forming molecules that could endure through cycles of heating, cooling, and dilution. Molecules that survived these cycles influenced future reactions by serving as templates. Their structure guided the assembly of new molecules that resembled them. This gradual emergence of template-based behavior created a turning point. Chemical systems were no longer limited to the immediate tendencies of their environment. They began to replicate specific patterns. Replication did not occur with perfect accuracy. Small variations appeared each time a pattern was copied. Some variations made the new molecules less stable, others made them more likely to persist. Through these differences, a new process subtly entered the scene. Patterns that held together continued to influence their surroundings. Patterns that fell apart faded from the environment. The ability to store and reproduce information created a quiet shift in how chemical systems interacted. Instead of forming structures only when conditions happened to allow it, structures began shaping the conditions themselves. A molecule that promoted reactions leading to its own continuation could become more common over time. A molecule that did not support such reactions would gradually lose its place. This was the beginning of a form of selection that acted not on organisms, but on patterns within molecules. These molecular patterns expanded the range of possible behaviors within chemical systems. They allowed chains of reactions to become more coordinated. Molecules could direct energy toward forming structures that supported their own persistence. They could influence which reactions took place and which did not. Over long spans of time, the molecules that stored useful information grew more abundant. Their presence changed the dynamics of their environment, making certain reactions more likely. This development also created the potential for cooperation between molecules. Some molecules provided stability, others served as catalysts that increased reaction speed. Still, others formed protective structures or helped gather essential components. By influencing each other through their stored patterns, these molecules formed networks more intricate than anything seen before. These networks created the foundations of systems that could adapt, reorganize, and respond to shifts in the environment. The emergence of information storage did not require intention or design. It arose because molecules followed the rules of chemistry, and certain arrangements proved more enduring under Earth's conditions. Once these arrangements could replicate patterns, they provided a new dimension to the growth of order. Patterns that persisted gained a presence beyond their moment of creation. They shaped future reactions, forming a bridge between simple chemistry and the more dynamic structures that would eventually evolve. What began as scattered fragments of information carrying chains gradually developed into a system where patterns could influence their own survival. This shift laid the groundwork for the next stage of organization, where replication, variation, and competition interacted more directly, guiding the path toward early biological order. As soon as molecules developed the ability to store information, a new dynamic entered the unfolding story of complexity. Patterns could now be repeated, copied, and carried forward into the future. Yet replication was never perfect. When a molecule served as a template for a new one, small variations appeared in the resulting structure. Some changes weakened the new molecule, making it unstable. Others produced molecules that held together more securely, allowing them to persist through cycles of heat, cold, and dilution. These variations created a natural form of competition among patterns, long before life emerged. In environments where molecules concentrated, such as protected pools, porous rocks, or clusters of droplets suspended in early oceans, this competition became a central force. Molecules that replicated more reliably tended to remain present. Those that fell apart quickly were removed by simple physical processes such as diffusion or breakdown. A pattern that persisted had more opportunities to influence surrounding reactions. It encouraged chains of activity that favored its continuation. This formed an early kind of selection, driven entirely by chemistry, where successful arrangements became more common simply because they endured. Replication introduced a surprising consequence. Molecules no longer existed only as isolated structures. Their success depended on how well they interacted with their surroundings. Some patterns promoted reactions that gathered useful components. Others enhanced the formation of protective features that sheltered them from disruptive forces. Each small advantage increased the likelihood that the pattern would be copied again. Over time, these advantages accumulated. Molecules that supported their own replication gained ground. Those that did not gradually disappeared. The environment became shaped by the molecules that persisted within it. Variation played an equally important role. A single alteration in a sequence could change how a molecule folded, how it interacted with other molecules, or how quickly it participated in reactions. Rapidly replicating patterns sometimes produce strains on available resources, while slower ones might vanish unless they possess strengths that increased their stability. This balance between replication and variation guided the earliest steps toward systems capable of adaptation. It created a gentle filtering process in which patterns that worked well remained and those that did not quietly faded. As certain molecular patterns became more stable, they began to cooperate in ways that increased their survival. Some molecules acted as catalysts, speeding up reactions that supported replication. Others formed structures that shielded important components from harsh conditions. Still others helped store energy or bind raw materials needed for continued growth. These interactions formed networks far more intricate than their individual parts. Cooperation emerged not from intention but from the simple fact that molecules that supported each other tended to survive together. The presence of these networks changed the chemical landscape. Regions rich in cooperative molecules developed their own local conditions, different from the surrounding environment. Reaction rates shifted. Molecules concentrated in specific areas instead of dispersing. New opportunities for complexity arose. When networks grew large enough, they influenced the flow of energy and material around them, forming microenvironments that favored even greater organization. These environments amplified the advantages of stable, reproducible patterns, strengthening the shift from isolated reactions to coordinated systems. The earliest forms of self-sustaining behavior arose in these microenvironments. Molecules that worked together could maintain a cycle of reactions that continued as long as energy flowed through the system. Such cycles acted like primitive versions of metabolism. They consumed materials, transformed them, released energy, and produced new molecules that kept the cycle running. These cycles did not resemble modern life, yet they possessed qualities that allowed them to persist, reproduce, and adapt to changing conditions. They represented the first steps toward biological order. With replication, variation, and cooperation now intertwined, chemical systems moved steadily toward greater sophistication. The environment no longer shaped molecules alone. Molecules shaped the environment as well. Patterns that promoted their own continuation spread through space, forming pockets of increased complexity. Each pocket offered a new opportunity for structures to develop that could respond to change more directly. These developments reveal a quiet truth. Order deepens when patterns can reproduce themselves, vary, and compete within their surroundings. These processes do not require intention. They arise naturally from the rules of chemistry. Through countless repetitions over vast spans of time, they set the stage for the emergence of the first living systems, where information, structure, and energy flow become tightly connected in ways that shape all the life that follows. As information-carrying molecules became more stable and more abundant, they entered a stage where patterns began to influence their own continuation in increasingly organized ways. This shift marks the beginning of natural selection at the molecular level. Even though life as we know it had not yet emerged, the foundations of selection were already present. Variations between molecules affected their stability, their ability to replicate, and their interactions with surrounding networks. Some patterns responded more effectively to changes in their environment, while others weakened under the same conditions. Through these differences, the earliest selective pressures began to shape the path toward biological order. In environments where chemical networks had already taken root, molecules encountered conditions that favored both stability and adaptability. Networks that remained intact through cycles of heating and cooling, flooding and drying, or chemical influx and depletion had a greater chance of influencing future reactions. As molecules became more specialized in their roles within these networks, certain sequences demonstrated advantages in the way they folded, stored energy, or catalyzed reactions. These advantages allowed them to become more central to the networks that depended on them. Natural selection at this early stage did not operate on organisms or complex cells. It acted directly on molecular patterns. A molecule that happened to replicate more efficiently gained a greater presence in its environment. One that folded into a shape that protected it from breakdown had more opportunities to influence future reactions. A molecule that catalyzed a reaction useful to the network could spread indirectly by increasing the success of molecules that relied on that reaction. Through these simple dynamics, pressure accumulated steadily. Molecules that supported network stability persisted. Those that did not were filtered out. One of the most important developments during this stage was the formation of primitive compartments. These compartments did not resemble modern cells. They were small, temporary structures such as droplets, small vesicles, or films formed on mineral surfaces. Yet these simple boundaries provided a crucial advantage. They held certain molecules close together, allowing reactions to proceed without being diluted into the surrounding environment. By keeping networks intact, compartments amplified the effects of molecular cooperation. They also increased the likelihood that successful patterns would remain together long enough to replicate. Inside these compartments, selection became even more pronounced. Molecules that contributed to the stability of the compartment had a higher chance of persisting. Molecules that disrupted the network or destabilized the environment tended to be lost. Over time, compartments enriched themselves with patterns that supported their own maintenance. Some structures improved the uptake of energy, others eased the flow of reactions, still others helped maintain internal balance even as external conditions changed. In each case, selection reinforced patterns that promoted endurance and discouraged those that undermined it. The emergence of selective pressure created a clear directional movement in the development of complexity. Whereas earlier chemical systems formed and dissolved with little continuity, these new systems demonstrated increasing resilience. They could withstand disturbances that once would have destroyed them. They recovered from changes in temperature or moisture. They adapted to shifts in the availability of resources. This resilience was not the result of conscious effort. It arose from the quiet interplay of forces that favored structures capable of enduring. Over long stretches of time, these selective processes produced greater specialization among molecules. Some sequences became adept at storing information. Others excelled at catalyzing reactions. Still others formed stable frameworks that sheltered or organized the network. These specializations created a division of roles within compartments. Molecules worked together not because they chose to, but because their interactions increased the stability of the network as a whole. Each role made the system more robust, allowing it to persist through cycles that would have erased earlier forms of organization. This gradual enrichment of roles marks a significant deepening of order. It shows that complexity emerges naturally when patterns are copied, varied, and filtered by their environment. With selection now guiding molecular interactions, these early systems approached a threshold where they could behave as unified entities. They no longer responded only to immediate physical conditions but also to the patterns preserved within them. This integration of structure, information, and function forms the first quiet steps toward the earliest forms of life, setting the stage for the next chapter in the story of organization. As early molecular systems became more stable and more interconnected, a new principle began to shape their behavior. This principle, known as emergence, describes how complex patterns arise when many simple components interact. No single molecule determined the structure of these systems. Instead, organization appeared as a collective property. When many reactions influenced each other at once, new behaviors surfaced that could not be predicted by examining any single part in isolation. These behaviors were cohesive and persistent, giving early systems a surprising unity despite their simplicity. Emergence became especially clear in the ways that networks of molecules coordinated their reactions. A molecule that increased the production of a helpful substance influenced not only itself but the entire system. Another molecule that slowed a destabilizing reaction affected the balance of every process connected to it. Even small changes in concentration altered the dynamics of the network, creating ripple effects that guided the whole system toward new forms of stability. These interactions built patterns that were larger than their ingredients. The system behaved as though it possessed a logic of its own, even though it arose entirely from the interactions of its parts. As compartments grew more structured, emergence played an even greater role. Molecules inside these boundaries no longer reacted in open environments where products drifted away. Instead, they remained in close proximity, allowing reactions to reinforce each other. Concentrated environments amplified the effects of feedback, making coordinated behavior more likely. In this setting, patterns that once formed briefly now persisted across multiple cycles. Structures that once dissolved quickly gained new endurance. The system began to act not as scattered reactions but as a unified, self-reinforcing whole. Early forms of multicellular organization in later life would follow similar principles, but emergence appeared long before cells existed. Its presence in these chemical networks shows that complexity does not arise suddenly. It emerges step by step as components interact in ways that deepen their collective behavior. When many molecules cooperate, the system begins to display properties that none of them could produce alone. This is how stability, responsiveness, and even early forms of internal regulation came into being. Because emergence depends on many interactions happening together, it introduces a calm rhythm into the development of complexity. A system with countless small processes tends to move steadily, adjusting quietly as conditions shift. If you notice your thoughts becoming slower or your breathing easing as you picture these gentle, interconnected patterns, that is completely natural. Systems built from many small contributions often evoke a sense of quiet continuity, and you may allow that feeling to deepen if it helps you rest. One of the most striking examples of emergence in these early networks came from coordinated cycles of reactions. When molecules activated each other in repeating sequences, the entire network produced rhythms that persisted as long as energy flowed through it. Some cycles created stable flows of materials, others regulated temperature or pH within a compartment. These patterns resembled the earliest versions of regulatory systems, capable of maintaining balance even when external conditions fluctuated. The stability of these rhythms increased the durability of the networks in which they operated. Emergent behavior also created opportunities for specialization. Molecules that served as catalysts grew more central to the system. Molecules that stabilized the structure of the compartment became essential components. Molecules that stored information shaped the system's memory. Each role contributed to the functioning of the whole. As these roles grew more distinct, networks developed recognizable structure. They had internal pathways, preferred routes for energy flow, and patterns of reaction that repeated predictably. In this way, emergence guided molecular systems toward organization that resembled the earliest forms of biological coordination. These developments formed a bridge between chemistry and biology. The systems that emerged were not yet alive, but they demonstrated behaviors that would later become hallmarks of life: cooperation, regulation, persistence, and adaptation. They showed that the roots of biological organization lie in the natural tendency of components to form patterns when they interact under consistent rules. With each passing cycle, early compartments grew more coherent. Their internal processes became more aligned. Their structure became more resistant to disruption. All of this prepared the ground for the next great transition, when molecules would begin to form true multicellular structures, and emergence would take on an even deeper role in shaping complexity. As early systems grew more coordinated, a profound transition began to unfold. Molecules that once acted independently started to form unified structures, capable of behaving as single entities. This shift marks the emergence of multicellular organization, though in its earliest form it appeared not as the complex life familiar today, but as clusters of cooperating compartments. These clusters allowed chemical systems to share resources, protect one another, and distribute tasks across larger networks. Each step created opportunities for greater specialization, deepening the structure of early life's precursors. At first, these groupings were simple: compartments gathered in loose arrangements, held together by surface interactions or shared chemical gradients. When one compartment produced a substance that benefited others nearby, the entire cluster gained an advantage. This cooperation did not arise from intention. It emerged from the fact that conditions supporting one compartment often supported others. Over time, clusters that exchanged materials or sheltered each other from environmental disturbances persisted more reliably than isolated compartments. Their stability allowed them to explore new chemical possibilities that solitary compartments could not sustain. As these clusters strengthened, a division of roles quietly began to take shape. Some compartments became better at absorbing energy from their surroundings. Others excelled at catalyzing reactions that supported the stability of the group. Still others developed structures that helped maintain boundaries or protect delicate networks within the cluster. These emerging differences allowed the group to function more effectively as a whole. By distributing tasks, the cluster increased its resilience and could adapt more readily to fluctuating conditions. Within these growing structures, the flow of information became increasingly important. Molecules carrying patterns influenced not only their own compartments, but neighboring ones as well. When a compartment replicated its internal structures, it passed on the patterns that had proven successful. These patterns spread through the cluster, guiding the development of new compartments. In this way, information became a shared resource. It acted as a thread that wove the cluster together, ensuring that successful traits persisted across generations of compartments. The rise of gene regulation in later organisms would build directly on these early principles. Even at this primordial stage, compartments began responding to internal cues that influenced their behavior. Concentrations of certain molecules signaled when to produce additional structural components or when to shift energy toward critical reactions. These internal signals allowed compartments to coordinate their actions with the needs of the cluster. The earliest versions of communication emerged from these interactions, creating networks of influence that shaped the development of the group. As coordination deepened, clusters began to display behaviors more characteristic of living organisms. They responded to changes in temperature, light, or chemical availability by adjusting their internal processes. They grew when resources were abundant and contracted when conditions became harsh. They expanded into new territories when gradients of energy or nutrients offered opportunities. These movements were not directed, but they reflected the collective influence of many small reactions working together. Through these coordinated responses, clusters extended their reach and adapted to new environments. The stability of these early multicellular structures rested on the balance between cooperation and individuality. Compartments retained their own internal networks, but they also contributed to the larger system. When a compartment failed, the cluster survived if the remaining compartments compensated for the loss. When a compartment succeeded, its beneficial patterns spread through the cluster. This interplay created a dynamic equilibrium that allowed the cluster to thrive in a world filled with fluctuations and challenges. Over time, clusters grew more intricate. They developed internal gradients of energy and materials that supported specialized regions. Compartments in one area might focus on gathering resources, while those in another focused on reactions essential for structural integrity. These internal differences marked a significant leap in organization. The cluster was no longer a simple collection of similar compartments. It had begun to form distinct zones with complementary roles, resembling the earliest tissues found in later life. These developments reveal that multicellularity was not an abrupt invention. It was the natural result of cooperation among simpler systems. When compartments shared stability, information, and energy, they created structures far more capable than their individual parts. These early clusters set the stage for the evolution of true multicellular organisms, where cells would become highly specialized components of a unified living whole. As early multicellular clusters became more organized, one of the most transformative developments was the rise of internal communication. In the beginning, interactions between compartments occurred only through simple exchanges of molecules in shared environments. Over time, however, these exchanges grew more coordinated. Compartments began responding not only to the conditions around them, but also to signals produced within the cluster itself. This growing network of communication allowed the cluster to behave as a unified system, adjusting its activity in ways that supported its overall stability. The simplest form of communication arose from the diffusion of molecules that carried information. When the concentration of a particular substance increased in one region, nearby compartments sensed the change and altered their behavior accordingly. This created a ripple of responses that moved through the cluster. These ripples helped regulate the internal environment by increasing or decreasing essential reactions. Over time, compartments learned to rely on these signals, using them to maintain balance during cycles of growth, stress, or environmental change. As compartments grew more specialized, communication became even more crucial. Some compartments produced molecules that acted like messages, informing others when conditions required a shift in energy use or structural reinforcement. Others developed surfaces that responded more strongly to these messages, allowing them to act as sensitive monitors of internal conditions. This interplay created pathways of influence that guided the entire cluster. Even without nervous systems or dedicated communication organs, these primitive structures began to behave as if they possessed a collective awareness. Within these networks, timing became an important factor. Reactions did not occur randomly. They followed sequences influenced by the flow of signals. When one compartment initiated a reaction, another responded only after receiving the necessary chemical cues. These chains of responses created a rhythm inside the cluster. The rhythm helped coordinate activities such as the production of structural molecules, the breakdown of nutrients, or the distribution of energy. Each action depended on the reactions taking place around it, creating patterns that were reliable and predictive. This coordination laid the foundation for later systems in which communication would become highly sophisticated. In plants, animals, and microbes that developed much later, Similar principles guide electrical impulses, hormonal signals, and chemical pathways. The roots of these mechanisms lie in the early networks that demonstrated how information could flow through a system without centralized control. The balance between sending and receiving signals enabled early clusters to adapt, survive, and maintain coherence. Communication also played a role in protecting the cluster from instability. When conditions outside the cluster shifted rapidly, internal signals helped maintain order. A sudden drop in temperature, for example, could slow reactions in exposed compartments. Signals from deeper within the cluster compensated by increasing reaction rates or distributing stored energy. When the external environment became too harsh, communication helped the cluster retract or reinforce vulnerable regions. These coordinated responses allowed the cluster to withstand challenges that would have destroyed less organized systems. As clusters increased in size, communication helped them develop internal gradients. Some regions became more active, generating signals that directed resources toward areas of need. Other regions became quiet centers of storage or stability. These gradients created spatial organization within the cluster, shaping the earliest forms of internal architecture. Over long periods, these architectural patterns became more defined, allowing clusters to behave like early tissues, each with distinct roles that supported the whole. The emergence of communication also encouraged the development of memory within clusters. When certain conditions repeated, compartments reacted more quickly. They produced signals in predictable patterns, as if recalling previous experiences. This memory did not reside in a single molecule or compartment. It lived in the rhythm of reactions and the pathways carved by repeated flows of information. Through this memory, clusters learned to anticipate changes and respond with greater efficiency. These communication networks reveal a deep truth about the rise of complexity. Systems do not evolve simply by adding more components. They evolve by increasing the connections between those components. When reactions influence other reactions, and compartments influence neighboring compartments, a level of organization emerges that far exceeds the sum of the parts. Early clusters, with their flowing signals and coordinated responses, demonstrated that communication is essential for any system seeking stability, flexibility, and long-term survival. They prepared the way for the intricate signaling that later life would rely on to move, sense, grow, and adapt. As multicellular clusters continued to grow and interact with their surroundings, they became part of larger systems that extended far beyond their individual boundaries. These systems, which we now think of as ecosystems, emerged whenever groups of organisms or proto-organisms shared the same environment. Even in their earliest forms, ecosystems displayed patterns of connection and exchange that shaped both the living components and the physical world around them. These exchanges introduced relationships that strengthened resilience, distributed resources, and allowed complexity to deepen across many levels of organization. The simplest ecosystems formed when clusters settled into regions where energy and materials flowed predictably. Near volcanic vents, warm water carried minerals upward from the planet's interior. These minerals supported reactions that fed entire communities of early structures. In shallow pools, sunlight provided energy that allowed networks to build and repair themselves. These environments did not merely host clusters, they shaped them. The conditions favored certain reactions, certain patterns of cooperation, and certain forms of communication. Over time, the clusters adapted so closely to these conditions that they became integral parts of the surrounding environment. As clusters multiplied and diversified, they began influencing one another in subtle ways. When one group consumed a particular resource, it created opportunities for another group that thrived on the remaining materials. When one cluster released byproducts into the water or the air, those substances became the raw materials for others. These interactions formed cycles of exchange that linked the fates of many clusters together. The cycles acted as stabilizing forces, keeping the environment within ranges that supported continued complexity. Even without intention, early ecosystems regulated themselves through the collective behavior of their components. Some structures became producers, capturing energy and transforming it into forms that other structures could use. Others became consumers, breaking down materials and making them available again. Still others served as decomposers, returning essential elements to the environment. These roles were not assigned deliberately. They emerged naturally from differences in structure, chemistry, and location. As each cluster performed its function, it contributed to the stability of the whole ecosystem. This distribution of roles strengthened resilience, making the system harder to disrupt. Over time, ecosystems began to develop patterns that repeated across many different environments. Gradients of temperature and light created layers within bodies of water, each supporting distinct communities. Tidal rhythms shaped life along coastlines, encouraging clusters to adapt to cycles of immersion and exposure. Seasonal changes guided the timing of reactions and growth. In each case, the environment set the rhythm, and the living systems within it learned to follow. These synchronized relationships formed a natural choreography, allowing complexity to appear in predictable and enduring ways. Ecosystems also shaped the evolution of early clusters themselves. When resources became scarce, clusters that used them more efficiently had an advantage. When environments changed rapidly, clusters that communicated more effectively could adapt. When new opportunities emerged, clusters with flexible internal structures could explore them. These pressures encouraged diversity. Different clusters developed different strategies for survival, adding new layers of interaction to the ecosystem. Each strategy influenced the others, creating a web of relationships that grew richer over time. The presence of ecosystems introduced a powerful feedback loop into the development of complexity. Clusters influenced their environment by producing heat, releasing chemicals, or altering the flow of materials. The environment, in turn, influenced which clusters thrived. This quiet exchange shaped landscapes, stabilized conditions, and guided the direction of evolution. Even in its earliest forms, life did not merely adapt to the planet. It participated in shaping it. The balance between influence and response created systems capable of long-term stability and gradual change. As ecosystems matured, their internal structure became more defined. Pathways of energy flow formed predictable chains. Networks of nutrient exchange grew intricate. Patterns of competition and cooperation developed across different regions. In all these interactions, the same principles appeared. Systems that shared resources and distributed roles thrived. Systems that lacked balance grew unstable. Through this logic, ecosystems forged order on a scale far larger than any individual cluster could achieve alone. These early ecosystems laid the foundation for the rich diversity that would later emerge across the planet. They show that complexity arises not only from the organization within living structures but also from the relationships between them. Cooperation, competition, exchange, and adaptation all contribute to the harmony of the whole. As the story continues, these relationships will link the rise of biological complexity to the broader patterns of the planet itself, revealing how the environment and life evolved together into deeper forms of organization. As ecosystems continued to expand and diversify, two powerful forces shaped their internal structure. The first was cooperation, which allowed clusters, organisms, and later cells to support one another in ways that strengthened the entire system. The second was competition, which encouraged diversity, adaptation, and resilience. These forces did not oppose each other. Instead, they worked together to create balance, variety, and enduring forms of organization. Through their combined influence, ecosystems developed into complex arrangements where countless forms of life could coexist and evolve. Cooperation appeared whenever clusters exchanged materials that benefited each other. In early oceans, some structures released compounds that others needed. These exchanges linked the survival of different groups, forming chains of dependency that increased stability. Even as life grew more sophisticated, cooperation remained fundamental. Structures that could harness light or chemical gradients provided essential energy. Others helped recycle nutrients, ensuring that nothing useful was wasted. These relationships strengthened ecosystems by allowing resources to flow more evenly, reducing the risk of sudden collapse. Competition emerged alongside cooperation, shaping the direction of adaptation. When two groups relied on the same resource, they naturally influenced each other's success. Structures that gathered energy more efficiently or protected themselves more effectively gained an advantage. Over time, these advantages encouraged diversification. Different groups evolved distinct strategies for obtaining energy, reproducing, or defending themselves. This branching of strategies enriched ecosystems, adding layers of interaction that increased the system's overall resilience. The interplay between cooperation and competition created a dynamic equilibrium. Cooperation stabilized ecosystems by linking groups into supportive networks. Competition prevented stagnation by driving change and innovation. These forces created patterns that repeated across the planet. In one region, groups might specialize in capturing sunlight. In another, they might break down minerals or recycle gases. Wherever life emerged, these two forces guided its development, helping ecosystems adapt to shifting conditions. These relationships also shaped the early interactions between organisms and their environments. Structures that cooperated with others gained protection from harsh conditions. Those that competed effectively secured access to essential resources. The environment acted as a quiet mediator, rewarding strategies that promoted stability and discouraging those that led to imbalance. Through this ongoing exchange, ecosystems developed into self-regulating communities, capable of enduring floods, droughts, temperature shifts, and other challenges. One of the most remarkable outcomes of cooperation was the emergence of symbiotic relationships. These relationships began in simple forms, such as clusters attaching themselves to surfaces that provided steady energy or nutrients. Over time, some clusters became so closely connected that they functioned as merged systems. Each partner contributed something essential. One might process energy, another might provide structural support. Another might shield sensitive reactions from the environment. These partnerships deepened the structure of ecosystems, allowing new forms of complexity to evolve. Competition also drove important changes in structure. When groups faced limited resources, they developed mechanisms to make better use of what they had. Some became more efficient at capturing light. Others evolved ways to move toward favorable conditions. Still others found ways to shield themselves from threats or recover more quickly from damage. These adaptations allowed ecosystems to host greater variety. Instead of a few dominant forms, ecosystems filled with many specialized groups, each playing a unique role. Together, cooperation and competition created systems that could recover from disturbances. When one group declined, another often rose to fill its role. When conditions changed, ecosystems adjusted through shifts in population and resource flow. These adjustments occurred slowly but continuously, allowing ecosystems to remain stable even as the planet itself changed. This resilience became one of the defining features of living systems and remains central to the organization of life today. The balance, shaped by cooperation and competition, reveals that the growth of complexity is not random. It follows principles that encourage stability while allowing room for adaptation. Ecosystems organized themselves by blending supportive relationships with selective pressures. This blend created networks that could endure across millions of years, evolving gracefully as the environment changed. As the story continues, these principles will extend beyond the realm of early life, influencing the development of organisms, landscapes, and even planetary systems. As ecosystems expanded across early Earth, they encountered continual shifts in climate, chemical availability, and physical landscape. These changes introduced pressures that shaped the evolution of early life and pre-life systems. Environmental pressures did not guide organisms with intention. Instead, they revealed which structures were stable enough to endure and which ones were vulnerable to change. Through this filtering process, organisms and clusters developed new forms, new interactions, and new strategies for survival. The quiet influence of the environment shaped life's direction, revealing that complexity grows not only through internal organization but also through continual adaptation to outer conditions. One of the most influential pressures came from fluctuations in temperature. Early Earth experienced periods of cooling and warming caused by volcanic activity, atmospheric composition, and the distribution of sunlight. When temperatures rose, reactions accelerated. When temperatures fell, reactions slowed or stopped. Clusters that could adjust their internal processes to these changes gained a significant advantage. Some developed molecules that protected sensitive reactions during colder periods. Others learned to store energy when conditions were favorable, allowing them to persist when energy became scarce. Temperature acted as a sculpting force, shaping the systems that could maintain order across varying conditions. Chemical availability also played a defining role. Early environments differed widely in the kinds and amounts of materials they offered. Some locations were rich in minerals that fueled essential reactions. Others provided abundant heat or light. Still others offered organic molecules that could be used as building blocks. When resources shifted, clusters and early organisms had to adapt. Structures that relied on a single resource often struggled when that resource diminished. Those capable of using multiple materials showed greater resilience. Over time, this encouraged versatility. Systems that could shift their chemical pathways or explore new reactions had a greater chance of persisting. Geological forces added another layer of influence. Tectonic movement created continents and ocean basins. Volcanic eruptions introduced new minerals into the oceans. Underwater vents opened pathways for chemical gradients that fueled complex reactions. As the landscape changed, ecosystems were pushed into new regions or separated from old ones. These changes encouraged diversity by placing different groups in different environments. Once separated, groups developed unique strategies for stability and growth. These differences added richness to the planet's complexity and shaped the early distribution of life. Environmental pressures also influenced communication and cooperation within clusters. When conditions shifted quickly, compartments that could send and receive signals more effectively had an advantage. They responded with coordinated adjustments, altering reaction rates or energy flows to protect the stability of the group. This responsiveness deepened communication pathways and increased interdependence among compartments. These connections strengthened the emergence of early tissues and later organisms by reinforcing behaviors that maintained internal order, even when external conditions became challenging. Competition intensified when environments changed rapidly. Limited resources encouraged early organisms to innovate. Some developed ways to gather energy more efficiently. Others found new niches where fewer groups competed. Still others evolved defensive structures that protected them from harsh conditions or aggressive neighbors. These adaptations did more than ensure survival. They increased the diversity of forms and behaviors present in early ecosystems. Diversity, in turn, strengthened ecosystems by providing multiple strategies for responding to environmental disruption. As organisms and clusters adapted, they also changed their environments. Structures that consumed certain chemicals created new chemical gradients. Organisms that released oxygen altered atmospheric composition. Clusters that grew densely shaded the surfaces beneath them, creating cooler regions. These small changes accumulated over immense stretches of time. The environment shaped organisms, and organisms shaped the environment. This reciprocal relationship created feedback loops that encouraged stability. When changes favored complexity, ecosystems became richer. When changes threatened stability, systems adapted or reorganized to maintain balance. Through these cycles of pressure and response, the planet and its living systems evolved together. Early life did not simply endure external forces. It interacted with them, and these interactions became the engine of evolution. The pressures of the environment pushed organisms into new possibilities. Their responses opened new pathways for complexity. This interplay reveals that adaptation is not a separate process from organization. It is a fundamental part of how systems maintain and deepen their structure. As the story continues, these dynamics will broaden to include the vast planetary systems that shape conditions for life on a global scale. As biological complexity deepened, the influence of the planet itself became increasingly apparent. Life did not evolve in isolation. It rose within a world shaped by oceans, atmosphere, landforms, and internal heat. These planetary systems created vast patterns of movement and energy flow that guided the development of ecosystems across the globe. At the same time, early life began shaping these planetary systems in return. The interplay between living structures and Earth's physical processes formed one of the most enduring relationships in the history of the planet. Through this relationship, life and environment became tightly bound, each influencing the other in subtle and persistent ways. The oceans were among the most powerful forces guiding early organization. They spread across the planet as immense reservoirs of water, absorbing heat from the sun and distributing it through currents. These currents created gradients of temperature and nutrients, allowing different forms of life to settle into distinct regions. Warm waters favored rapid reactions, while cooler regions supported slower, more stable processes. The constant movement of the oceans mixed materials from many sources, ensuring that ecosystems had access to a wide range of resources. This mixing also encouraged diversity, as organisms adapted to the specific conditions created by shifting currents. The atmosphere added another layer of structure. Winds carried heat and moisture across continents and seas, shaping climate patterns that repeated in regular cycles. These cycles regulated rainfall, temperature, and the distribution of energy across the surface of the planet. Organisms learned to follow these patterns. Some flourished during warm seasons. Others adapted to cooler or drier intervals. Over time, these atmospheric rhythms became part of life's internal timing. Organisms coordinated growth, reproduction, and dormancy with the predictable changes in their surroundings. This synchronization strengthened ecosystems by aligning the behavior of countless species with the flow of planetary energy. Earth's geological activity contributed to organization in powerful ways. Tectonic movement created mountain ranges, basins, and coastlines. These landforms influenced how water flowed, where sediment accumulated, and how climate varied from region to region. Volcanic eruptions released gases and minerals into the environment, altering atmospheric composition and providing nutrients essential for growth. Thermal vents along the ocean floor delivered a steady stream of heat and chemicals into the deep sea, supporting ecosystems that thrived without sunlight. These geological processes formed a dynamic stage upon which life unfolded, offering both challenges and opportunities for adaptation. In shallow waters and along coastlines, cycles of tides guided early behavior. Rising waters brought nutrients. Falling waters concentrated organisms in smaller spaces, forcing interactions that shaped the earliest versions of community structure. The gentle repetition of tides created a rhythm that organisms learned to anticipate. Even now, many species still follow these cycles, showing how deeply planetary patterns are woven into the fabric of life. Planetary systems not only supported life but were gradually shaped by it. As organisms consumed carbon dioxide and released oxygen, the atmosphere changed. New chemical pathways emerged, altering the balance of gases and influencing global temperatures. Organisms that formed shells contributed to sediment layers that became limestone. Microbial communities altered soil structure, helping water move through landscapes and making nutrients available to future generations. Through countless interactions, the physical planet slowly transformed in response to living systems. This transformation reveals that planetary organization is not fixed. It evolves through the combined influence of geological forces and biological activity. These planetary relationships introduced a remarkable sense of continuity. Oceans, atmosphere, and geology created slow, sweeping patterns that repeated over long spans of time. Life learned to follow these patterns. The flow of energy through currents, winds, and cycles provided a steady, calming rhythm. If you find your mind softening as these large-scale processes drift into focus, that is completely natural. The planet's quiet movements have guided life for billions of years, and allowing your thoughts to move gently with those rhythms can bring a deep sense of rest. This intricate dance between life and planetary systems illustrates a key principle of organization. Complexity grows when systems influence one another across multiple scales. Organisms shape ecosystems. Ecosystems shape landscapes. Landscapes shape climate. Climate shapes evolution. Through these interactions, Earth became a place where complexity could flourish. As the story continues, these patterns will extend beyond the boundaries of the planet, revealing how similar principles guide the formation of worlds, stars, and structures across the universe. Across the surface of Earth, climate patterns emerged as some of the most powerful examples of self-organization on a planetary scale. They formed from the steady interplay of sunlight, atmospheric composition, the rotation of the planet, and the distribution of land and oceans. These patterns did not arise through intention. They appeared because air, water, and heat follow consistent physical rules. When these rules interact over long periods, they produce rhythms that become part of the structure of life. Climate shaped ecosystems, influenced evolution, and guided the movement of organisms across continents and seas. At the heart of these patterns lies the uneven heating of Earth's surface. Sunlight warms the equatorial regions more strongly than the poles. This difference in heating creates rising currents of warm air near the equator and sinking currents of cooler air near the poles. As air moves between these regions, it forms convection cells that stretch across thousands of kilometers. These cells generate wind belts that sweep moisture, heat, and clouds around the planet. The consistency of these wind patterns creates predictable climates, such as the warm, humid tropics and the cooler, drier, temperate zones. The oceans respond to these atmospheric patterns with their own organized movements. Surface waters warm in the sunlit regions, expand slightly, and flow toward cooler areas. Deeper waters rise to replace them, creating circulation patterns that carry nutrients across vast distances. These currents provide a lifeline for ecosystems by delivering minerals to regions where sunlight supports growth. They also redistribute heat, tempering temperatures along coastlines and influencing weather patterns far inland. Even without conscious direction, these flows form stable pathways that reinforce the global balance of energy. Seasonal cycles add another layer of organization. As Earth orbits the Sun, the tilt of its axis causes certain regions to receive more sunlight at different times of the year. This creates shifting patterns of temperature, rainfall, and atmospheric pressure. Organisms across the planet learned to align their behavior with these cycles. Plants adjusted their growth to warmer months. Animals migrated, reproduced, or rested in harmony with changing conditions. Ecosystems synchronized their rhythms with the slow turning of the seasons, demonstrating how climate shapes the timing of life's processes. Over longer periods, variations in Earth's orbit and rotation introduced additional shifts. Glacial cycles advanced and retreated, sea levels rose and fell. Deserts expanded, then contracted as rainfall patterns changed. Each shift challenged life to adapt. Some organisms followed new routes as habitats changed. Others evolved traits that helped them survive in altered environments. These transitions reveal that climate does not remain static. It changes according to physical laws, and living systems respond by exploring new forms of stability. Climate patterns also influenced the development of early human ancestors. Regions where rainfall was predictable supported abundant plant and animal life. Regions where climate shifted rapidly encouraged flexibility, innovation, and mobility. Although these developments occurred much later in Earth's history, they underscore a theme that runs throughout the story of organization. Planetary patterns guide the possibilities available to life, shaping how systems grow, persist, and transform. Despite their vast scale, climate systems remain sensitive to small influences. A slight increase in atmospheric gases can change the way heat is trapped. A shift in ocean salinity can alter the strength of a current. Volcanic eruptions can cool the atmosphere by releasing particles that reflect sunlight. These sensitivities demonstrate that climate is not a rigid structure. It is a dynamic system that maintains balance through continuous exchange. The resilience of climate arises from its complexity, yet this complexity also allows for significant change when conditions shift. Through all these interactions, climate illustrates how large-scale patterns emerge from simple physical processes repeated across time. The circulation of air, the movement of water, and the flow of heat combine to create systems that endure for thousands or millions of years. These systems set the stage for every ecosystem on Earth, guiding the distribution of life and influencing the direction of evolution. They represent organization on a planetary level, showing that the same principles that shape atoms and molecules also shape the atmosphere, oceans, and landscapes. As the story continues, these patterns will connect to even larger scales, revealing how planetary behavior becomes part of the architecture of the entire cosmos. As Earth's climate patterns continued to shape the distribution of life, ecosystems began influencing the planet in return. This two-way relationship grew into one of the defining features of Earth's organization. Planetary systems guided the conditions in which life evolved, yet living systems gradually transformed the atmosphere, the oceans, and even the chemistry of the crust. Through countless small interactions, life and environment became inseparable partners in the shaping of global order. Each influenced the other in ways that deepened complexity and created new possibilities for adaptation. Plants and microbial communities played some of the earliest and most influential roles in altering the atmosphere. When photosynthetic organisms first began releasing oxygen, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Before this transformation, oxygen was scarce, and many chemical reactions followed paths that would later become rare. As oxygen accumulated, new reactions became possible, supporting more energy-rich forms of metabolism. This shift altered the course of evolution by enabling organisms to harness energy with far greater efficiency. The atmosphere changed the trajectory of life, and life reshaped the atmosphere in turn. Oceans likewise reflected the influence of living systems. Microscopic organisms absorbed carbon dioxide and released oxygen, changing the balance of gases dissolved in the water. When marine organisms formed shells or skeletons, they removed minerals from seawater and contributed to sediments that accumulated over millions of years. These sediments eventually became limestone and other forms of rock. In this way, the actions of small organisms altered the chemistry of entire ocean basins. Over time, these changes affected ocean circulation, nutrient availability, and the distribution of ecosystems across the globe. On land, the spread of vegetation transformed the surface of the planet. Roots broke apart rocks, creating soil that supported future generations of plants. Soil, in turn, became a reservoir for water and nutrients, stabilizing landscapes and slowing erosion. As plants spread across continents, they altered rainfall patterns by releasing water vapor into the air. Forests created pockets of cooler air beneath their canopies and provided shade that influenced the temperature of surrounding regions. These changes reveal how life can modify the physical environment, creating conditions that support even greater diversity. The connection between life and the planet extended to the movement of essential elements. Nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, and sulfur cycled through organisms, soil, water, and air, in patterns that maintained global balance. Bacteria transformed nitrogen into forms that plants could use. Plants passed nitrogen through food webs. When organisms died, decomposers returned these elements to the environment. These cycles developed into global systems that supported stability across vast regions. Without the participation of life, the movement of these elements would follow far simpler paths, lacking the richness that now supports ecosystems across Earth. Living systems also shaped the structure of ecosystems by influencing how energy moved through them. Plants captured sunlight and transformed it into chemical energy, forming the base of food webs. Herbivores consumed plants. Predators consumed herbivores. Decomposers recycled nutrients when organisms died. This flow of energy created ordered pathways that supported the development of highly structured communities. Even though each organism acted according to its own needs, their interactions formed coherent networks that maintained long-term stability. These influences created a feedback loop that strengthened the resilience of ecosystems. When life altered the environment responded by supporting new forms of life. These new forms further modified their surroundings, making additional layers of complexity possible. The result was a planet whose surface, atmosphere, and ocean chemistry evolved hand in hand with the living systems they supported. This reciprocal relationship gave Earth a unique character among the planets of the solar system. It became a world shaped not only by physical forces but also by the activities of the organisms that lived upon it. These interactions reveal that planetary organization is not a one-way process. It is a conversation between physical systems and biological systems. Climate influences life. Life influences climate. Geology shapes ecosystems. Ecosystems shape geology. Through these exchanges, Earth developed into an environment capable of supporting intricate forms of organization. This deep interconnection prepared the way for the next transition, where the story of organization expands beyond the boundaries of Earth itself, linking planetary processes to the formation of stars, worlds, and structures across the universe. As life and planetary systems continued to shape one another, a much larger story unfolded far beyond the boundaries of Earth. The processes that organized molecules, organisms, and ecosystems were themselves part of a broader cosmic framework. To understand how reality organizes itself, the journey must widen to include the formation of planets and the environments that support them. Planetary systems arise from the same fundamental principles that govern organization at every other scale. They form when matter follows consistent rules, gradually gathering, heating, cooling, and settling into structures that endure across immense spans of time. The origins of a planetary system begin within a cloud of gas and dust drifting through space. These clouds are remnants of earlier generations of stars, enriched with elements forged in stellar interiors and released through explosions. Within these clouds, slight variations in density create regions that attract surrounding material. Gravity amplifies these irregularities, pulling gas and dust inward. As matter falls toward the growing center, it begins to rotate. This rotation flattens the cloud into a disk, with most of the mass accumulating in the central region that will become a star. Inside this rotating disk, particles collide and stick together. Dust grains join to form larger clumps. These clumps merge into rocky bodies that sweep through the disk, gathering material as they move. Over hundreds of thousands of years, these bodies grow into planetesimals, the building blocks of planets. Gravity strengthens with size, allowing some planetesimals to attract others. Through this process, the disk becomes a landscape of growing worlds, each following the same physical rules. The system organizes itself through collisions, mergers, and the steady pull of gravity. As the central star ignites, heat and light reshape the disk. Closer regions become too warm for certain materials to solidify, resulting in rocky planets near the star. Farther from the center, cooler temperatures allow ices and gases to accumulate, forming giant planets with thick atmospheres. This distribution appears in many star systems across the galaxy. The same principles that shaped our solar system apply everywhere. Rotation, gravity, temperature, and composition work together to produce families of planets arranged in consistent patterns. Within each forming planet, internal processes begin to unfold. Heat from collisions and radioactive materials melts the interior. Heavy elements sink toward the center, while lighter elements rise toward the surface. This separation creates layers, giving planets their structure. Some develop magnetic fields that protect their surfaces from radiation. Others form atmospheres that hold heat, moisture, and gases essential for chemical interactions. Every step follows the quiet logic of matter seeking balance under the influence of gravity and temperature. The presence of moons, rings, and asteroid belts reflects the same organizational behaviors. Moons form from leftover debris or from collisions that reshape planetary surfaces. Rings appear when particles remain in stable orbits, unable to gather into larger bodies. Asteroid belts mark regions where gravitational influences prevented a planet from forming. These structures illustrate that even when formation is incomplete, the system still organizes itself into predictable arrangements. Planetary systems also evolve over time. Orbits shift as bodies interact. Some planets migrate inward or outward, altering the structure of the entire system. Collisions continue to shape surfaces and rearrange debris. These changes do not disrupt organization. They are part of it. The system maintains coherence because the forces at work remain consistent, guiding matter into new configurations that still follow the underlying principles. As planets mature, the possibility of environments like Earth emerges. A stable orbit, suitable temperature range, atmospheric composition, and the presence of liquid water all depend on earlier stages of organization. When these conditions align, chemical networks can form, cycles can develop, and complexity can deepen. Planetary formation therefore serves not only as a physical process but also as a threshold for biological potential. The organization that begins in a cloud of dust may eventually support ecosystems, climates, and conscious observers. The formation of planetary systems reveals a recurring truth. Organization arises from the steady interplay of forces that shape matter across every scale. The same principles that guide molecules into networks and organisms into ecosystems also guide gas and dust into worlds. This continuity shows that complexity is not an exception. It is a natural expression of the universe as it follows its own quiet rules. As planetary systems settled into their long-term configurations, the forces that shaped them continued to guide their evolution. Among these forces, gravity remained the most influential architect. It determined how planets moved around their stars, how moons circled their planets, and how entire systems maintained coherence across billions of years. Yet gravity did not work alone. Other processes contributed to the order that emerged, including the exchange of energy, the behavior of gas and dust, and the distribution of angular momentum. Together, these forces created patterns that repeat across the galaxy, revealing that planetary systems are part of a universal language written in matter and motion. At the center of each system, the star acts as a stabilizing anchor. Its mass determines the strength of gravity that binds the entire structure. Stars shine because nuclear fusion in their cores creates outward pressure that balances the inward pull of gravity. This balance keeps stars stable for long stretches of time. The energy they release warms their planets, drives atmospheric cycles, and shapes the chemical possibilities available on their surfaces. Even the lifespan of a star influences the development of its system. Long-lived stars provide steady energy that allows planets to experience slow, predictable changes. Shorter-lived stars burn brightly but briefly, offering a narrower window for complexity to develop. Around these stars, planets follow paths determined by the interplay of gravity and motion. Conservation of angular momentum ensures that planets maintain their orbits unless disturbed by powerful interactions. These orbits are not random. They reflect the distribution of mass within the system and the history of collisions and migrations that occurred during formation. Some planets settle into nearly circular paths that provide steady climates. Others follow elliptical orbits that create dramatic changes in temperature across their cycles. These variations influence the environments on each planet, shaping the types of structures and processes that can arise. Moons and smaller bodies contribute additional layers of order. Moons can stabilize the tilt of their planets, influencing seasonal rhythms. Tidal forces between moons and planets generate internal heat, keeping geological processes active even when a world is far from its star. These tidal interactions can also slow a planet's rotation or lock a moon's orientation, creating consistent patterns in their movements. Rings around planets form when particles remain in regions where gravitational forces prevent them from merging. These rings display intricate structures shaped by the gravity of nearby moons and the distribution of particles within them. Beyond individual planets, resonance plays a significant role in organizing systems. When two bodies orbit their star in such a way that their periods follow a simple ratio, their gravitational interactions reinforce each other. This reinforcement stabilizes their orbits. Resonances appear in many systems, revealing that even seemingly chaotic interactions follow clear rules when repeated over long periods. These patterns add harmony to planetary systems, preventing collisions and ensuring that bodies maintain predictable paths. Further from the star, belts of asteroids and icy objects highlight the delicate balance between formation and disruption. In some regions, gravitational influences from large planets prevent smaller bodies from merging. Instead, they remain in stable orbits as collections of debris. These belts preserve materials from the early stages of the system, offering a record of its formation. They also serve as reservoirs of potential building blocks, capable of reshaping planets through impacts or delivering essential ingredients such as water or organic molecules. When viewed across the galaxy, these patterns appear again and again. Stars form from collapsing clouds, disks flatten and rotate, planets gather into families, moons, rings, and belts develop according to the same principles. Evidence from distant systems shows remarkable similarity to our own. Planets cluster near their stars or settle into wide orbits. Some migrate inward, creating compact systems. Others remain in place, forming broad architectures reminiscent of our solar system. The variety reflects local conditions, but the underlying order reveals a shared foundation. These repeating structures demonstrate that planetary systems are natural outcomes of the laws of physics. They do not require intricate design or rare events. They emerge wherever gas and dust follow consistent rules under the influence of gravity and motion. Through these quiet processes, the universe fills itself with worlds of every kind, each shaped by the same forces that guided the formation of Earth and the planets that accompany it. This universal order sets the stage for the next scale of complexity, where stars gather into galaxies that display patterns even more vast and enduring. As planetary systems settled into their long-term patterns, a larger architecture unfolded across the galaxy. Stars did not form alone. They gathered into immense structures shaped by the combined influence of gravity, rotation, and the distribution of matter. These structures, known as galaxies, reveal organization on a scale far beyond planets or individual stars. Yet the principles that guide them remain deeply familiar. Simple forces, repeated across great distances and long stretches of time, create patterns that endure for billions of years. Through these patterns, the universe demonstrates its capacity to shape order from the most basic interactions. Most galaxies begin within vast clouds of gas and dust that span many light years. Slight differences in density cause some regions to collapse faster than others. As these regions contract, gravity strengthens, pulling in additional material. The cloud begins to spin, and as rotation increases, it flattens into a broad disk with a dense center. Within this disk, stars form in clusters, each influenced by the surrounding gravitational field. The process resembles planetary formation, but on a much larger scale. Instead of planets forming around a single star, stars themselves form around a common center of mass. Spiral galaxies, among the most recognizable forms, display sweeping arms that curve gracefully around their centers. These arms are not rigid structures. They are regions where stars, gas, and dust move through patterns of density. As material enters an arm, it slows slightly, compressing the gas and triggering star formation. When it leaves the arm, it spreads out again. This creates a wave-like pattern that moves through the galaxy, shaping its appearance without requiring a fixed physical structure. The arms persist because the underlying gravitational pattern remains stable. This form of organization reveals how simple rules can produce striking visual order. Elliptical galaxies follow a different pattern. They lack the prominent arms of spirals and instead form smooth, rounded shapes filled with older stars. These galaxies often result from the merging of smaller systems. When galaxies collide, their stars pass through each other, while gas clouds interact, trigger new bursts of star formation, or disperse into new arrangements. Over time, these interactions erase sharp structures and create a more uniform distribution of matter. Even in the aftermath of dramatic collisions, the galaxy eventually settles into a stable form that reflects the balance of its internal motions. Irregular galaxies show that not all systems follow the same path. Some are shaped by gravitational encounters with larger neighbors. Others form in regions where matter is unevenly distributed. Despite their asymmetry, these galaxies still follow the governing principles of motion and gravity. Their shapes reflect unique histories, revealing how initial conditions influence long-term outcomes. This diversity illustrates the adaptability of the universe's organizing principles. Even when the starting materials vary greatly, structures still emerge that remain coherent over immense periods. Interactions between galaxies play a major role in shaping their evolution. Gravity pulls them toward one another, distorting their shapes long before they meet. When they finally collide, their stars may scatter into new orbits, while their gas clouds compress and ignite new regions of star formation. These interactions can produce bridges of material stretching between galaxies or tidal streams of stars that arc through space. Over time, the systems merge, forming larger galaxies with new identities. Despite the scale of these events, the underlying rules remain the same. Motion, gravity, and the distribution of matter determine the final structure. Dark matter also influences galactic organization. Although it cannot be seen directly, it exerts gravitational force that shapes how galaxies rotate and how they gather into larger clusters. Observations show that galaxies rotate too quickly to be held together by visible matter alone. Dark matter provides the additional mass needed to explain their stability. It forms a halo around each galaxy, creating the gravitational framework within which stars and gas move. This unseen component adds another layer of organization, demonstrating that the universe contains structures shaped by forces not immediately visible. Galaxies remind us that order does not require intricate instruction. It emerges naturally when matter interacts under consistent physical laws. Whether spiraling, merging, or drifting in irregular forms, galaxies display patterns that persist across billions of years. The same principles that guide atoms into molecules and planets into orbits also guide stars into these grand cosmic systems. As the story continues, these patterns will expand further, connecting galaxies into even larger structures that reveal the full scale of the universe's organizing power. As galaxies formed and evolved, they did not remain isolated in the vastness of space. Gravity connected them across immense distances, drawing them into groups, clusters, and superclusters that shaped the large-scale architecture of the universe. These connections revealed that organization extends far beyond individual galaxies. It continues upward into patterns so vast that they span hundreds of millions of light-years. Despite their size, these structures follow principles familiar from smaller scales. Differences in density guide motion. Gravity pulls matter into coherent forms. Interactions create patterns that endure for billions of years. Through these quiet processes, the universe arranges itself into a cosmic web. The first hint of this structure came from observing how galaxies gather into groups. A typical group contains a few dozen galaxies bound together by their mutual gravity. These groups drift through space as connected families, influencing each other's motions and occasionally merging. Larger clusters contain hundreds or even thousands of galaxies. The density of these regions attracts more material, including gas and dark matter, forming deep gravitational wells. Within these wells, galaxies orbit, collide, and reshape one another over long stretches of time. At an even larger scale, clusters link together through filaments of gas, dust, and dark matter. These filaments stretch across cosmic distances, forming threads that weave galaxies into long chains. Between the filaments lie vast voids where matter is scarce. This arrangement resembles a delicate lattice, with dense regions marking intersections where clusters gather and thin regions forming the spaces between them. The pattern is not random. It reflects the distribution of matter in the early universe, shaped by slight variations that gravity amplified over billions of years. Dark matter plays a central role in forming this cosmic web. Although invisible, it provides the gravitational scaffold upon which galaxies and clusters gather. Simulations show that dark matter clumps into filament-like structures soon after the beginning of the universe. Ordinary matter follows these patterns, cooling, condensing, and forming galaxies along the densest threads. The result is a cosmic network shaped by forces that remain constant across time and space. Even though the scale is enormous, the principle is simple. Matter flows along pathways of gravity, settling into stable arrangements that become part of the universe's enduring structure. Within this network, interactions between clusters shape the evolution of galaxies. When two clusters drift close, their mutual gravity distorts the shapes of member galaxies. Gas clouds are stretched or compressed, stars are scattered or redirected. Over time, these interactions can trigger new waves of star formation or strip galaxies of their outer layers. Despite these changes, the large-scale structure remains stable. The cosmic web persists because the forces that form it continue to guide the movement of matter. The cosmic web also influences the temperature of gas throughout the universe. In the densest regions, gas becomes heated as it falls into gravitational wells. In less dense regions, gas remains cooler. These temperature differences affect how galaxies form, how they evolve, and how they distribute stars across space. Through this interplay, the web acts as a framework that shapes the growth of complexity on galactic scales. It provides the environment in which galaxies develop their internal structures, including the spiral arms, star-forming regions, and elliptical shapes described earlier. When viewed across cosmic time, the web evolves slowly. Filaments thicken as more matter accumulates. Voids expand as galaxies drift toward denser regions. Clusters grow as they merge, becoming massive structures that shine brightly in X-ray light. Yet despite all these changes, the overall pattern remains recognizable. It is a testament to the universe's ability to create structure from simple beginnings. Slight variations in the early distribution of matter, amplified by gravity, produced a network that defines the large-scale shape of the cosmos. Contemplating the vastness of this structure can create a sense of quiet perspective. The slow formation of clusters and filaments, unfolding over billions of years, reflects a rhythm so gentle that it invites the mind to settle. If you feel your thoughts softening as you imagine these immense patterns stretching across space, that is completely natural. The same calmness that governs the formation of cosmic structures can support a feeling of rest as you continue through the story. These immense structures reveal that order permeates the universe at every scale. Galaxies form clusters, clusters form filaments, filaments shape the cosmic web. Through these layers, the universe organizes itself into a hierarchy that reflects the influence of fundamental forces acting over unimaginable distances. As the story continues, these patterns will connect to the properties of dark matter and dark energy, deepening the understanding of how the cosmos maintains coherence across its grandest scales. As the cosmic web stretched across the universe, a deeper mystery shaped its formation and stability. Much of the matter responsible for holding galaxies and clusters together could not be seen directly. This unseen substance, known as dark matter, exerted gravitational influence that guided the movement of stars, gas, and entire galaxies. Without dark matter, the structures observed in the universe would not hold their shape. Galaxies would rotate too quickly and scatter their stars into space. Clusters would fail to bind their members. The cosmic web would lack the dense filaments that define its architecture. Dark matter provided the invisible framework upon which the visible universe assembled itself. Evidence for dark matter emerged from the motions of stars within galaxies. When astronomers measured the speeds at which stars orbited their galactic centers, they discovered a surprising pattern. Stars far from the center moved just as quickly as those closer in. According to Newtonian gravity, this should have been impossible if only visible matter were present. The gravitational pull from stars and gas alone could not explain the observed speeds. Something unseen was adding mass, strengthening the gravitational field and keeping galaxies intact. This additional mass exceeded the mass of visible matter by a significant margin, revealing that most of the universe's matter is hidden from direct observation. Dark matter also influenced the behavior of galaxy clusters. When clusters were examined through gravitational lensing, a phenomenon where massive objects bend light from distant sources, their gravitational strength appeared far greater than the mass of their visible components. The bending of light revealed concentrations of mass located in regions where little or no light could be detected. This hidden mass formed vast halos that enveloped entire clusters, providing the gravitational scaffolding needed to keep galaxies together in groups and superclusters. Without these halos, the distribution of galaxies in space would look entirely different. Beyond galaxies and clusters, dark matter shaped the early history of the universe. Shortly after the formation of hydrogen and helium, the cosmos was filled with tiny fluctuations in density. Dark matter responded to these fluctuations by forming clumps that drew ordinary matter toward them. As the universe expanded and cooled, these clumps grew into the filaments and nodes that now form the cosmic web. Simulations of cosmic evolution that include dark matter produce structures nearly identical to those observed through telescopes. Without dark matter, these simulations fail to match reality, demonstrating its essential role in shaping the universe. The nature of dark matter remains one of the great unsolved questions in physics. It does not emit or absorb light. It does not interact strongly with ordinary matter. It reveals itself only through gravity. Despite this mystery, its influence is unmistakable. It provides the mass needed to explain galactic rotation curves, the stability of clusters, and the shape of the cosmic web. The universe behaves as though dark matter forms the backbone of every large-scale structure. Ordinary matter, including stars, planets, and living organisms, represents only a small fraction of the total mass. The visible world rests upon an invisible foundation. Dark matter also guides the behavior of gas clouds that form new stars. When gas accumulates in dark matter halos, gravity pulls it toward the center, where it cools and collapses into dense regions. These regions become nurseries for the formation of stars and planetary systems. The presence of dark matter determines where these nurseries appear and how they evolve. Even the distribution of galaxies across the sky reflects the distribution of dark matter beneath them. In this way, the universe organizes itself through the interplay of seen and unseen components. The existence of dark matter invites a quiet reflection on the nature of reality. Much of what shapes the universe cannot be observed directly, yet its influence permeates everything. The stability of galaxies, the clustering of stars, the structure of the cosmic web. These features arise because dark matter provides the gravitational framework that guides their formation. This interplay between visible and invisible matter illustrates a principle repeated throughout the story of complexity. Systems often rely on components that do not reveal themselves fully, yet their effects shape the patterns that endure. As the story continues, the scale of organization expands even further. Beyond dark matter lies the influence of dark energy, an even more mysterious force that affects the expansion of the universe itself. Through these interactions, the cosmos reveals how organization arises not only from the matter we can see, but also from the forces and components that remain hidden from direct view. Across every scale of reality, from the smallest particles to the cosmic web, a set of recurring principles shapes how structure emerges. These principles do not belong to any single domain. They appear in the behavior of molecules, in the organization of ecosystems, in the formation of planets, and in the arrangement of galaxies. They reveal that the universe builds complexity not through intricate instructions, but through simple rules repeated across vast stretches of space and time. When many small interactions unfold together, patterns arise that cannot be predicted by examining the parts alone. These patterns are the essence of emergence, and they guide the universe toward order again and again. One of the most universal principles behind emergence is the interplay between local interactions and global behavior. Molecules follow the rules of chemistry, cells follow the rules of biology, planets follow gravitational laws, galaxies follow the dynamics of dark matter and motion. Each component acts according to its immediate surroundings, responding to nearby forces or conditions. Yet when countless components behave this way, large-scale patterns appear. No single molecule dictates the shape of a crystal, yet crystals form with precise regularity. No single star determines the shape of a spiral galaxy, yet the galaxy develops its sweeping arms. Local rules create global order. Feedback also plays a crucial role. In chemical networks, feedback stabilizes reactions. In ecosystems, feedback maintains population balance. In climate systems, feedback regulates temperature. In galaxies, feedback from star formation influences how gas accumulates and how new stars arise. Positive feedback amplifies patterns. Negative feedback maintains stability. Together, they create systems that can endure while also adapting to change. These loops of influence allow structures to persist even when external conditions fluctuate, forming one of the core mechanisms that supports complexity throughout nature. Constraints guide the development of structure as well. Atoms arrange themselves according to the rules of physics, Organisms grow within the limits of available energy and nutrients. Planets form where temperature allows materials to solidify. Galaxies settle into shapes that reflect their distribution of mass. Constraints do not prevent complexity. They enable it by defining the range of possible forms. When systems operate within constraints, they discover arrangements that are stable, efficient, or self-reinforcing. Over time, these arrangements become the backbone of the structures that endure. As these principles play out across different scales, recurring motifs appear. Spirals in galaxies resemble spirals in storms. Branching patterns in rivers resemble branching patterns in neurons. Clusters of stars mirror clusters of cells that gather into tissues. These similarities arise not because the systems are connected directly, but because they follow the same organizational rules. The universe expresses its logic through patterns that reappear in many forms, showing that complexity is woven from threads that span all scales. Because emergence depends on many interactions happening together, it creates processes that move slowly and smoothly across time. Large-scale systems settle into rhythms that feel steady and continuous. If you notice your thoughts becoming quieter as you imagine these gentle, recurring patterns, that is completely natural. The same calmness that guides the formation of galaxies and ecosystems can support a sense of rest as the story unfolds. You may allow your breathing to soften, knowing the patterns of the universe emerge gradually and peacefully. The universality of these principles also reveals that complexity does not require rare conditions. Wherever matter gathers, moves, interacts, and responds to energy, structures can arise. Molecules create networks. Networks create compartments. Compartments create organisms. Organisms create ecosystems. Ecosystems shape planets. Planets gather into systems. Systems form galaxies. Galaxies assemble into the cosmic web. Each level builds upon the last, not by replacing earlier rules, but by extending them into new realms. This layered organization shows that reality is not divided into separate domains. Instead, it forms a continuous hierarchy where each level expresses variations of the same underlying logic. Patterns evolve, deepen, and become more intricate, yet they remain connected to the principles that shape the earliest forms of order. This continuity suggests that the universe has an inherent tendency toward structure, driven by the interaction of energy, matter, and fundamental forces. As the story moves forward, these principles will illuminate how diversity grows from simple beginnings, how complexity increases even as entropy rises, and how consciousness emerges as one of the most intricate expressions of organization found within the universe. As the universe continued expressing its organizing principles across larger and larger scales, a quieter transformation unfolded within the more intimate realms of chemistry and biology. Diversity began to grow. At first, it appeared in the subtle variations between molecular patterns. Later, it emerged in the differences between cells, organisms, and ecosystems. Over time, diversity became one of the most powerful forces shaping life. It allowed systems to explore new possibilities, to respond to changing environments, and to develop resilience through variety rather than uniformity. This growth of diversity reveals a central truth about organization. It does not create a single ideal form. It creates many forms, each contributing to the stability of the whole. The earliest expressions of diversity arose from simple variations in molecular sequences. When molecules replicated imperfectly, new versions appeared. Some changes weakened the structures. Others increased their stability or altered their behavior. These variations allowed different molecules to inhabit different chemical niches. One might bind to minerals more effectively. Another might store energy more efficiently. Another might resist breakdown during temperature shifts. Over time, the variety of molecular forms expanded, creating a richer landscape for chemical interactions. Diversity at this level increased the range of reactions that ecosystems could support. As life developed into cellular form, diversity began to shape biological behavior more directly. Cells adapted to specific environments by altering their internal chemistry, their structural components, or their methods of gathering energy. Some cells became specialists in capturing sunlight. Others focused on breaking down organic material. Others built protective layers or developed ways to move toward favorable conditions. These differences created opportunities for cooperation, competition, and interdependence. Through them, ecosystems grew more intricate, their networks strengthened by the presence of many distinct roles. The evolution of multicellular organisms expanded diversity even further. Cells within an organism began to differentiate into tissues with unique functions. Some formed structures for movement, others became part of sensory systems, others developed into organs that regulated internal balance. This internal variety allowed organisms to adapt more effectively to their surroundings. It also allowed them to explore new environments that single-celled organisms could not. Through these developments, diversity became a foundation for innovation. Each new form opened pathways to future forms, linking evolution into a continuous expression of possibility. Diversity also shaped interactions between organisms. Species developed unique traits that influenced how they gathered resources, avoided predators, or reproduced. These traits interacted within ecosystems in complex ways. When one species filled a particular niche, another species adapted to a different one. When environments changed, some species migrated or evolved new strategies. Others declined, leaving space for new forms. This continual turnover created dynamic ecosystems that balanced stability with change. Diversity prevented ecosystems from becoming fragile. If one species failed, another could often adapt to fill its role. Across geological time, periods of rapid diversification appeared following major environmental changes. When new habitats emerged, life responded with an explosion of new forms. In the oceans, the development of new chemical conditions allowed organisms to build shells, spines, and complex skeletons. On land, the emergence of soil, rivers, and forests created spaces that invited plants and animals to explore new behaviors. Each major transition in Earth's history expanded the possibilities for life, increasing both the number of forms and the complexity of their interactions. The same principle of diversity appeared in planetary and cosmic scales. Stars formed in many sizes, temperatures, and lifespans. Planets developed a wide range of atmospheres, compositions, and orbital patterns. Galaxies grew into spirals, ellipticals, and irregular shapes. Diversity arose because small variations in initial conditions led to different outcomes. These differences enriched the structure of the universe. They allowed for planets like Earth to exist among countless other worlds, each shaped by its own unique combination of influences. Diversity strengthens resilience across all scales. When many forms coexist, systems can absorb disturbances without collapsing. A shift in climate may affect some species but allow others to flourish. A change in stellar radiation may destabilize certain regions but leave others stable. Diversity distributes risk and creates pathways for recovery. It allows systems to reorganize rather than break apart. This resilience explains why life has persisted through dramatic shifts in Earth's history, including volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and changes in atmospheric composition. The growth of diversity also reveals something subtle about the universe. As systems become more varied, they gain the capacity to sense and respond to their surroundings with increasing nuance. Organisms develop sensory structures. Ecosystems develop layers of interaction. Even planets develop climates that respond to a range of external forces. Diversity increases the richness of responses available to any system. It deepens complexity not by concentrating power but by expanding possibility. As the story continues, these principles will lead toward one of the most intricate expressions of organization found in the natural world. Among the many forms shaped by diversity, one will develop the capacity for reflection, abstraction, memory, creativity, and awareness. Consciousness will emerge not as an exception but as a continuation of the universe's tendency to build complexity from simple beginnings. As diversity increased across life and across the universe, new layers of organization emerged that relied on information, memory, and coordination. Nowhere did these layers develop more profoundly than in nervous systems. Long before complex thought appeared, Early organisms evolved networks capable of sensing their environment, transmitting signals, and responding in ways that increased their chances of survival. These networks marked a turning point in the story of organization. They allowed organisms to integrate information across space and time, transforming simple reactions into guided behavior. Through this transformation, the universe began shaping systems capable of perception and choice. The earliest nervous systems were simple arrangements of cells that could detect changes in their surroundings. When touched, they contracted. When exposed to light, they shifted position. When chemicals signaled the presence of food or danger, they altered their direction of movement. These responses were not yet coordinated through a central structure. Instead, they arose from local interactions between cells that communicated through electrical or chemical signals. Even without a brain, these early networks created patterns of behavior that increased stability and survival. As organisms grew larger and more complex, the need for coordinated responses became stronger. Signals had to travel farther, reactions had to be timed more precisely, movements had to be organized so that one part of the body supported the actions of another. This pressure led to the development of nerve cords and clusters of neurons that acted as early control centers. These centers did not yet possess thought, but they managed information flow. They linked sensory inputs to appropriate responses, allowing organisms to navigate environments filled with opportunity and risk. Over time, these control centers evolved into increasingly sophisticated structures. Neurons formed networks capable of storing simple patterns of activity. When an organism encountered similar conditions again, the network responded more efficiently. This basic form of memory allowed organisms to learn from experience. Memory strengthened the relationship between past and present, enabling behavior that reflected more than immediate stimuli. Through this capacity, early nervous systems gained the ability to predict rather than simply react. As the number of neurons increased, their connections multiplied. Networks formed layers that processed information in parallel rather than in isolation. Sensory inputs were combined and refined. Motor outputs became more coordinated. Organisms developed behaviors such as exploring, hunting, and avoiding obstacles. These behaviors emerged from the structure of the networks rather than from any singular instruction. They showed how complexity deepens when many components work together to interpret the world. With time, nervous systems developed internal models that allowed organisms to navigate more flexibly. These models did not require consciousness. They arose from patterns of firing that represented aspects of the environment. Through these patterns, organisms could maintain balance, track moving objects, and anticipate changes. The ability to construct internal models marked a major shift in organization because it created a space where information could be held, compared, and transformed. This internal space became the foundation for future developments in awareness. Social behavior also played a role in the evolution of nervous systems. When organisms lived in groups, communication became essential. Signals conveyed danger, opportunity, and the presence of others. Some species evolved neural circuits that detected social cues and adjusted behavior accordingly. Cooperation deepened, competition refined itself, and new forms of interaction appeared. These relationships placed pressure on nervous systems to interpret complex signals, respond appropriately, and maintain stable relationships within groups. The emergence of specialized sensory organs amplified these developments. Eyes gathered information about light, ears detected vibrations, chemical sensors identified food, mates, and threats. As sensory organs became more refined, nervous systems expanded to process the increased flow of information. Each new sensory capability opened pathways to richer representation of the world. Organisms became more adept at distinguishing patterns, predicting events, and making decisions that increased their chances of survival. These advancements reveal that nervous systems evolved not through sudden leaps but through gradual deepening of structure. Local interactions between cells grew into networks. Networks grew into systems capable of memory. Memory grew into the capacity to model the world. At each stage, organization increased because information flowed more efficiently, more reliably, and with greater nuance. This progression set the foundation for one of the most remarkable developments in the universe's history. As nervous systems expanded, some reached a level of complexity that allowed them not only to sense and respond, but to reflect, imagine, and understand. From these foundations, consciousness would eventually emerge as a natural extension of the principles that shaped every form of organization before it. As nervous systems grew more intricate, they reached a threshold where the integration of information became profound enough to generate new forms of awareness. This transition did not occur suddenly. It emerged from countless small changes that deepened an organism's ability to perceive, remember, and respond. With each improvement in sensory precision, neural connectivity, and internal modeling, organisms gained a richer understanding of their surroundings. Eventually, these capacities allowed some nervous systems to construct an inner world that reflected the outer one. This inner world formed the foundation of consciousness, one of the most complex expressions of organization found in nature. The earliest signs of awareness appeared when organisms developed the ability to distinguish between themselves and their environment. A simple boundary already existed at the cellular level, but nervous systems added new layers of interpretation. Organisms began to separate sensations that originated within their bodies from sensations caused by external forces. This distinction allowed them to maintain internal balance more effectively. It also opened the possibility of purposeful action. Once an organism understood the difference between internal state and external stimuli, it could choose responses that supported its survival rather than relying solely on reflex. From this ability to distinguish self from surroundings came the capacity to track cause and effect. Nervous systems that integrated sensory information over time could detect patterns. They recognized that certain events led to others. When an organism learned that moving toward a particular sound or scent resulted in food, it began to shape its behavior according to expectation. This association did not require thought as humans experience it, but it represented a step toward prediction. Prediction allowed organisms to navigate the world with greater efficiency and reduced uncertainty. Memory played a central role in this development. As neural networks grew denser and more interconnected, they gained the ability to store complex patterns of activity. These patterns became records of past experiences. When similar conditions arose, the nervous system activated familiar networks, allowing the organism to respond rapidly and appropriately. Memory transformed behavior by tying present decisions to past outcomes. It also allowed organisms to refine their internal models over time, improving their understanding of the world. As internal models became more detailed, organisms developed something remarkable. They began to anticipate events before they occurred. They tracked the trajectory of moving objects, predicted the behavior of others, and prepared their bodies for action. Anticipation created a mental space where possibilities could be evaluated before being acted upon. This space fostered flexibility and creativity. Organisms that could imagine outcomes without experiencing them directly gained a distinct advantage. They could avoid danger, seek opportunity, and adapt to unfamiliar situations. Social behavior further intensified the evolution of consciousness. When organisms lived in groups, they needed to interpret the signals, intentions, and positions of others. Some species evolved neural circuits that detected subtle cues in posture, movement, or scent. These circuits allowed them to anticipate the actions of their peers and respond cooperatively or defensively. Over time, social awareness expanded into the ability to recognize individuals, form relationships, and navigate complex interactions. These tasks required sophisticated internal representations, deepening the structure of conscious experience. As nervous systems evolved, they also developed the capacity for attention. Attention allowed organisms to prioritize certain information over others, focusing their limited resources on what mattered most at any given moment. This selective perception improved decision-making and enhanced survival. Attention also supported the ability to learn, by strengthening neural pathways associated with repeated or meaningful experiences. Through this mechanism, consciousness became more stable and more reliable. Eventually, in some lineages, nervous systems reached a level of complexity where they could not only perceive and respond but also reflect. Reflection allowed organisms to examine their own thoughts, feelings, and actions. They could evaluate choices, plan for the future, and imagine scenarios far beyond their immediate environment. This development marked the emergence of conscious thought. It represented the culmination of countless layers of organization extending all the way back to early chemical networks. Consciousness did not arise from a single point in evolution. It emerged gradually as systems became capable of processing information across many scales at once. With each step, the nervous system gained new ways to organize experience. It became an integrative structure that united sensation, memory, emotion, and understanding. Through this integration, consciousness became one of the universe's most sophisticated tools for interpreting itself. These developments show that even the most intricate experiences arise from the same principles that shape molecules, ecosystems, and galaxies. Emergence, feedback, diversity, and adaptation guide the growth of awareness, just as they guide the formation of stars and the organization of life. As the story moves toward its conclusion, these principles will come together to reveal how complexity and simplicity coexist within the fabric of reality, and how consciousness participates in that larger pattern. Across the long journey from particles to planets, from molecules to minds, a single theme quietly unites every stage of organization. Complexity emerges when simple components interact according to consistent rules. These interactions generate patterns that persist, deepen, and adapt across time. They give rise to structures that can regulate themselves, respond to their surroundings, and evolve into new forms. Through these processes, reality organizes itself not through force or intention, but through the steady expression of natural principles that govern every level of existence. Understanding this continuity reveals how deeply connected all structures of the universe truly are. At the smallest scales, particles combine into atoms, and atoms form molecules. These molecules join into networks whose behavior depends on the flow of energy and information. As these networks grow more coordinated, they develop the capacity to store patterns, replicate them, and respond to external conditions. From these simple beginnings arise the foundations of chemistry and biology. Each reaction, each exchange, and each fluctuation contributes to the gradual assembling of forms capable of increasing resilience. Life begins as a quiet consequence of matter interacting under the laws of physics. Once life emerges, organization deepens further. Cells cooperate to form tissues. Organisms assemble into ecosystems. Ecosystems integrate with climate, geology, and planetary cycles. Across all these layers, patterns of exchange, support, stability, diversity expands. Feedback loops maintain balance. Adaptation creates new possibilities. These interactions reveal that life is not an interruption of physical order, but one of its most intricate expressions. Organisms do not stand apart from the universe. They continue its patterns with greater richness and subtlety. As nervous systems evolve, new dimensions of organization appear. Information becomes not only something to store, but something to interpret. Behavior becomes guided rather than reactive. Perception, memory, attention, and reflection weave together, forming inner worlds that mirror the outer one. Consciousness emerges from this integration as a natural development of complexity. It allows organisms to explore their surroundings with expanding nuance, to imagine possibilities, and to form connections across time. Through consciousness, the universe gains the ability to observe itself, to experience its own patterns from within. At cosmic scales, similar principles guide the formation of stars, galaxies, and the vast web linking them together. Gravity shapes clouds of gas into worlds. Feedback from star formation regulates the distribution of matter. Diversity in initial conditions produces a variety of planetary systems and stellar structures. Even the presence of dark matter and dark energy reflects the universe's habit of forming patterns that extend beyond direct observation. Across billions of years, these large-scale processes create a universe that is both dynamic and coherent, filled with recurring structures despite its enormous range. When viewed together, these patterns reveal that reality does not fragment into separate domains. Instead, It forms a continuous hierarchy in which each level grows out of the one before it. The emergence of life does not break from the physics that formed stars. The emergence of consciousness does not break from the biology that formed organisms. Every stage respects the same underlying principles. Each expresses them in new ways, adding depth, variation, and possibility. Through this continuity, the universe reflects a delicate balance between change and stability, between randomness and structure, between diversity and unity. This continuity also shows that the universe is not static. It evolves. Patterns unfold across time as new forms appear, adapt, and interact. The path from simple particles to reflective minds is not predetermined. It arises from countless branching possibilities, each shaped by local conditions and the laws that govern matter and energy. Yet despite this open-ended nature, the universe produces complexity again and again. It suggests that the tendency toward organization is as fundamental as the forces that shape motion and structure. As the story of organization comes to its close, a sense of calm emerges. The universe evolves slowly, with vast rhythms that unfold over billions of years. These rhythms offer a perspective that softens experience, inviting the mind to settle into the quiet patterns that shaped everything from the first stars to the thoughts that happen in this moment. Letting those rhythms settle within you can bring a gentle restfulness, as if the vastness of the cosmos lends its steadiness to the present. We from Sleepy Stories wish you a good night.